Are fantasy fans racist and sexist? It is, of course, a question that has been asked by several media outlets, several um, influencers, several TV studios throughout the last years, with series coming out like Kenobi, The Wheel of Time, and The House of the Dragon, and of course, more specifically in this case, The Rings of Power. And we've seen that this question, or rather this statement, that fans are racist and sexist, is more and more prevalent for this series, for The Rings of Power, because of course, Lord of the Rings is such a beloved franchise, and it is very easy to just negate all criticism by calling people racist. But is this actually so? In short, no, it isn't. It isn't. 99.9% of the fantasy fans aren't racist. They just enjoy their books and their characters and want them to be represented on screen as such, as written. And of course, there's backlash against diversity in certain cases because it often doesn't make sense why characters are changed or why characters of color are added in for no apparent reason other than just having diversity there. So what I want to do today in this video is going over two articles by Cinemablend and two reactions of Ursula K, LeGuin, who wrote the Earthsea series, on the TV adaptation of her series, because it touches on several similar points that fans have issues with in The Rings of Power. Of course, it's not everything, it's not a complete comparison because there are two totally different things. And when the adaptation was made, Ursula Le Guin was, of course, alive, otherwise, she couldn't have reacted against it. Unfortunately, she died in 2018, so I think she might have had something to say about um, this backlash against fans as well. But of course, J.R.R. Tolkien is not alive anymore. Christopher Tolkien now also isn't alive anymore, so they are not there to talk about the changes to the books and if they like them or not. We know that Christopher Tolkien was not a fan of the Peter Jackson trilogy because it changed a lot um, from the books to the films, um, and we know that. So of course we can't really say that that is also Professor Tolkien's opinion because he isn't alive to tell us anymore. So without further ado, let's go into this first one. So Whoopi Goldberg gets real about representation in fantasy after fans complain about black hobbits and Lord of the Rings of Power. The Lord of the Rings has a massive fan base, so it wasn't a huge surprise that the Rings of Power TV series quickly set a record among shows on Amazon Prime, with 25 million people tuning in for the first episodes. However, of course, because it's so popular, it has, of course, a lot of backlash and scrutiny surrounding it, mainly surrounding Rings of Power's diverse cast. That is not really the main issue here, but people like to see that it's the main issue. Um, okay, so now Whoopi Goldberg is going against people who have a problem with black hobbits. So we would like to see as many people represented in fantasy as exists. So all of y'all who have problems because there are black hobbits, get a job, go find yourself because you're focused on the wrong stuff. The show features a black elf, black female dwarf, and several black Harfoots, aka the Rings of Power version of hobbits, because they are hobbits. They're not just Harfoots isn't a race. Hobbits are, along with a woman as the protagonist. All these characters have been targets of racist and sexist remarks from people claiming that they don't fit into the lore of the franchise because they don't. Um, so is that racist and sexist to say that the character is not the character as in the books and as in the lore? No, it's just a simple fact. The episode of The View also addresses the diversity in the new Game of Thrones prequel, The House of the Dragon, where the richest man in Westeros is a black man played by Steve Toussaint. While neither the Lord of the Rings films nor Game of Thrones were particularly diverse, the franchises are now more inclusive with casting. And I mean, with House of the Dragon, at least they made it make sense because he is a black man, his family is black as well. The Valarians are mostly black so far as I've seen. I think they're all black. Um, in episode 3, when they have their big war council on the Stepstones, I think they were all black. He has a son and a daughter who are mixed race because, of course, he has a white wife. So it makes sense because he's surrounded by a black family. And what they did in the Rings of Power is just add a few people of color here and there without it making sense. And that is the main issue here. It's not really that Lord of the Rings is diverse. Um, it's where they put the diversity that the problem is and how they portray the female characters. So she also noted the new Lord of the Rings series, The Rings of Power and Game of Thrones prequel House of the Dragon are both massive hits, but they don't exist in the real world. There are no dragons, there are no hobbits. You know that. And then she went on to talk about how the new Little Mermaid will have a black actress playing Ariel and how the sea creatures can literally be any color. But you know, that's a whole different story. There are critics who said they were too woke by adding diverse characters. Are you telling me black people can't be fake people too? Is that what you are telling me? I don't know if there's a Hobbit Club or if there will be protests, but people, what is wrong with y'all? Many have spoken out against rude comments made by these trolls. This includes original Hobbit actors and blah blah blah. It goes on. The original Hobbits, along with Goldberg, have made it clear that whether it's fantasy or real life, all should always be welcome and included. And in the fandom, all people are included. I haven't seen any backlash against black people playing elves or dwarves or hobbits because it's cosplay and it's the fandom and people are allowed to enjoy themselves in the fandom. It's a whole different thing if you want to, you know, adapt the books and you're constantly saying that you're true to the books, but you're not. You're just changing everything you want. You take snippets here and there from characters that are vaguely described in the first stage as being athletic and being Amazonian, you know, Galadriel, and put those characteristics in the second stage with it, which is already a few thousand years later. So, I mean, this is not. People like to see Galadriel in the trilogy. Um, in the books, I mean, she's a strong character. She's a strong female character in the books. Eowyn is a strong female character in the books. But, I mean, it's seemingly because there are less women than men in Tolkien's work that people feel like, or at least showrunners feel like, they need to change these female characters and just hype them up, make them basically something else entirely, make them warrior heroes, warrior queens, warrior elves, whatever. But it's not done to make the story better. It's uh, just done purely for the sake of changing it. And of course, there are no dragons in real life, there are no hobbits in real life. But to fans, it matters. And to fantasy authors, it often matters as well how the adaptation is made. And I'm going to go into that with the reactions of Ursula Le Guin. They put a lot of their own into this world, of their own reasoning behind it, and people changing that willy nilly just for the reason of either having diversity, having more female characters in there, just adding a bunch of original characters that it doesn't make sense anymore, just throwing, um, you know, uh, visual references to the Lord of the Rings trilogy in there, even though they constantly say that they want to be a thing that stands on its own 2 feet. Um, you know, they just wanted to make a you know, a fan fiction with black elves and black dwarves, but you know, putting the name of Tolkien on it, and that is the issue that people have. I mean, if you want to make such a fantasy world, you can. If you have this level of imagination, you can make a diverse fantasy world, but you have to you have to have brains to do it. You have to be thinking about how you want to create a world, how you want to fit these diverse characters in there, how they would interact with each other. Um, you need to be, you need to be a writer for that, and the showrunners clearly are not writers because the stuff they throw in there, it's not even about diversity anymore. I think people have said, well, okay, it's there. We just pretend that the characters don't exist or still don't acknowledge their existence because they're not making sense in the lore. But what is worse is that is just a bad show. Overall, there are some pretty nice shots. Some costumes look nice, but most of it is generic fantasy. Um, People go against that more than the diversity at this point. And of course, you can say as many times as you want that that elves are described as white in the appendices, to which Amazon has a right, but they don't care. They just change that, even though it's literally there, and they're saying constantly that they went back to the books. Miriel never ruled. That is clearly in the appendices as well, but they don't care. They just throw it in there um, because they want to create the story that is not Tolkien. They want to create a story of their own, but they're not imaginative enough to do it, so they need to change an IP. So that's for this one, and it basically continues into, wow, seriously, this ad is bad. Um, I don't want to see this. Um, so, Lord of the Rings Ismael Cruz Cordova reveals some vicious backlash since his Rings of Power casting and how he has been handling it. So let's skip this ad real quick. Um, Amazon Prime Video's Lord of the Rings Rings of Power marks the first time that the world created by J.R.R. Tolkien has featured characters played by people of color. So it's not the world Tolkien created then. I mean, he has diversity. He has a lot of diversity actually, but you're willing, if you're willing to see it, if you're willing to actually read the books, you see that there is a lot of diversity. Um, so you have the Druidine, who are a black humanoid race. They are more dwarf-like, shorter-lived than men. They're like forest people, but they're really cool characters, and I really like them in the books. But they are dark, so you can put them there in the show without anyone complaining about it. And they lived in Numenor for a short while, so you could do that as well, since you're condensing the storylines, and it doesn't matter which people were present in Numenor at the end of the Second Age anymore, apparently. Um, so you could do that. You could focus more on the Easterlings. You could focus more on Harad, on Far Harad. Maybe go into the corruption of Sauron, and have a setting there where with brown people and dark-skinned people, because they would fit in that area. And now we have random placing of black characters, which is the issue. So Ismael Cruz Cordova, an Afro-Latino actor who is playing the Sylvan elf Arondir, who is the only black elf we've seen so far. He opened up about the vicious racist backlash he has received since being cast in the Lord of the Rings spin-off. It's not spin-off, it's a prequel. Um, Seriously, I mean, do we really need to go into this anymore? I mean, it's a prequel. They don't want it to be a prequel, but it is a prequel, however you turn it. I mean, it's the Second Age. What follows on the Second Age? Guess what? The Third Age. So, no, it is not a spin off. So, he was cast as the first elf, played by a Latino actor in the Tolkien franchise back in 2020, and as an actor recently revealed, since he was attached to the Lord of the Rings, he has had pure and vicious hate speech pour into his social media DMs nearly every day, but we don't see any of that. Um, and I mean, I don't doubt that there are some idiots out there who think, being toxic is funny or being racist is funny. There are also people who are genuinely believing that other cultures are less. And, those people can obviously also uh, send these vicious emails, and then it's entirely justified to be shocked and to be, disgusted, and that's your full right, because it is disgusting if you just get backlash because of your race. But it's not the actors that people go against, it's the characters. And I mean, can you be racist against a fantasy character? Well, maybe you can, but I don't know it personally. I personally feel like no, literally, since they don't feel like part of the lore because they don't fit into it. While other diverse characters that you could place in the show, they are completely ignored. So they just want to show a few people of color in a wide environment to say, look, we have diversity. Please clap at us, give us 10 on 10 stars reviews, and just say that the show is magnificent because we have a few characters. So look at us, how progressive we are. But then completely ignoring all the diverse cultures that there are in Middle Earth. So also putting hobbits in there, um, Harfoots, they are browner of skin, but what they did is place them in a different age, in the second age where there's no mention of hobbits at all. Um, might there have been hobbits? Yeah, maybe at the end of the second age, there started to be a development of the hobbits, but we don't know that. But Harfoots are browner of skin, but instead of having a complete group of actors with a brown skin, they add a few dark skinned characters, and most of them are white. So they pretend to have, this diversity there and being diverse, but um, you know, they are not. They are not, and they don't care. They just wanted to show people, look, we also cast black people and brown people. Are very good of us. Um, and that is even more terrible than the bad writing of this show. So what Ismael Cruz Cordova says, I fought so hard for this role for this very reason. I felt that I could carry that torch and made sure that my elf was most elven, the most incredible, because I knew this was coming. You can never use it as an excuse. But elves don't look like that. They didn't, but now they do. Well, in the books they still don't, and in the universe they still don't. It's only in the show that they do. So there's also this meme, of course, where what happened to the black dwarfs and the black elves in the second age. At the end of the second age, because there are none in the third age. So what happened there? And that's something that the showrunners didn't think about. They just wanted to put diversity in there and didn't want to think about the wider consequences that this has, about the logic behind it. So we go a bit on about his back history, and then it's again, he was not surprised by the racism brought his way for being part of the Lord of the Rings first racially inclusive series. Though Rings of Power has had a lot of positive reaction from audiences, including avid fans of the fantasy series, the series has also been review bombed for allegedly being unfaithful to the source material, with people of color representation being some fans' reasoning for disliking the series, which is, justified because it is unfaithful to the source material, and that is not review bombing. Saying that this show is bad for all its reasons, for the costumes, the sets, some of the sets at least, visual effects, um, dialogue, setting, the pacing. I mean, those are also problems with the show, and those are apparently not review bombing because it's not about the faithfulness to the source material apparently. So it's not review bombing if you say that it's unfaithful to the source material. It's entirely justified, and I mean they should stop saying that we are racist because we say that it is unfaithful to the books, because it is, um, and it will always be seen that way. And I mean there are fans who read the books and see those shows as separate things. Having the films is one thing, but having the books is another thing, because the films have also been changed, and they changed some characters, they changed dialogue, they changed pacing for story reasons mostly, and there were a lot of people who went against that as well at the time. Um, So you have these fans who are like, I mean, I watch the series as a thing, and I have the books, those are still there, and they don't really care. And there are other fans who really care because, I mean, either for personal reasons they don't see it as a fantasy series, they see it as a part of their life that's being attacked by, a mega corporation which has a record of ruining a great fantasy series. So that is the primary backlash. It's not faithful to the source material, and that includes people of color. That is an unfortunate uh, side effect of that, but it's still the truth. They are not faithful to the source material, and it's really disgusting that he does get um, a racist backlash. But as we don't see it, those DMs, we don't see those reactions. So I mean, how much, what is the percentage of fans that do this, of people who do this? We don't know. um, so that's it for these two Cinemablend articles. And I want to go over two reactions, as I said before, from Ursula LeGuin about her Earthsea series. One is from 2005. I think they're both from 2005. Um, but these are reactions against the adaptation of the Earthsea series, which was called The Legends of Earthsea. So she reacted against that after the film basically was published, because it's a two-part miniseries, I believe. So it's basically one movie. Um, and, as an author, she was not involved at all. She tried to be involved, but she had the standard consultant contract, which means whatever the showrunners wanted to mean. So she didn't have a say in any of that. So I want to go over it because Earthsea is a diverse world with a minority of white people actually in on the Eastern Isles. It's a world set on an island realm basically, the archipelago, and you have several various sets of islands, and you have one race of white people who live in on the Eastern Islands, the Kargits, and then the rest of the archipelago is basically people of color. There are brown skinned people, dark skinned people, red brown skinned people. So there's a lot of diversity there, and the miniseries wasn't diverse. So that's for this reaction. So when by the time they got the backing from the Sci-Fi Channel, so that would be 2003 or 2004 probably, for the miniseries, and Robert Halmy Sr. had come aboard, they had lost Boyne, Philippa Boyne, who was the main reason for her selling the rights. So that was a blow, but I had just seen Mr. Halmy's miniseries Dream Talkers. I think it's Dream Keepers, by the way, which is it's stunning Native American cast. So I said, hey, maybe these will be cast, and I was given to understand that he had found it very difficult to work with those people. Well, I said, you do realize that most of the people in Earthsea are those people, or anyhow not white. And she says that they reacted that their reaction may have used that wonderful weasel word color blind, but it wasn't reassuring because I do remember saying to my husband, "Oh gee, I hope they don't have a honky Gad." Gad is the main character. He is basically the center of the story, this coming of age story. Um, so he is a black character, or well, not black. He's red brown, I believe. Uh, so that's one of the main characters. He's a diver. He's not white skinned. So and they changed that in the miniseries. They made him white. Um, so although I knew well that a film must differ greatly from a book, I hoped they were making no unnecessary changes in the plot or to the characters, a dangerous thing to do since the books have been known to millions of people for over 30 years. To this, they replied that they could change the book story and characters any way they liked because they reached lots more millions of people than I did. And then they sent the script, and she had never been in. She withdrew her pronunciation guide of names, so the names were also screwed up. And when she saw the script, she realized that what the writer had done was kill the books, cut them up, take out an eye here, a leg there, and stick the ace bits into a totally different story, stitching it all together with catgut and hokum. They were going to use the name Earthsea and some of the scenes from the books in a generic McMagic movie with a silly plot based on sex and violence. Basically, Rings of Power without the sex part and without the violence, because it's just a boring series. The Rings of Power, at least. And Earthsea series was, it was really bad. Um, it wasn't great, to say the least. There's a lot of issues with that series as well. Um, but the Rings of Power, they do the same. They take bits out of what Tolkien said in books they don't have the rights to, and then fit them all together in a second age where they don't fit, and then say, we're true to the books because this is what Tolkien said. Look, here it is, where Tolkien said this. And as a fan, you're like, no, he might have said that, but that doesn't make these characters, you know, the characters that they are in this period. So I mean, the writers, they might have read the books. I mean, who knows? They might be genuine Tolkien fans, but they completely, as um, Miss LeGuin said here, they cut the books up, take out an eye here, a leg there, and stick them together in a different story, uh, stitching it all together with catgut and hokum, in this case being hobbits. Um, and there was nothing I could do about it. There is nothing the book author can do about it, not with the standard Hollywood contract. A lot of people don't know that. Even professional movie reviewers who should know better often write as if the author were responsible for the movie. The very rare exception, such as J.K. Rowling's control over the Harry Potter films, is thought to be the rule. But in most cases, the truth of a film to the book is entirely up to the honor, intelligence, and artistic integrity of the filmmakers. And we've seen with Rings of Power that the showrunners have neither of those things. Um, so she got the movie before it was screened, but still couldn't do it. Of course, she still couldn't do anything about it. But after it was released, Mr. Lieberman, one of the producers, published a statement telling people what Ursula, whom he has never met, intended by the books. And that changed the situation. They were taking advantage of my silence by sticking words in my mouth, which is basically what they do with Tolkien. They say what he intended to do. Uh, and he's dead. He can't react on it. Christopher Tolkien can't react to it anymore. Tom Shippey can't react to it because he's out and he probably can't say anything. Simon Tolkien is there as a consultant, but as you have a consultant contract, they still can completely ignore you. So she put a reply on our website, which is still there, and now the film is shown. She can speak freely. Um, some things we, writers and fans, shouldn't let Hollywood keep doing to us. Some assumptions we shouldn't let Hollywood make. And this is the interesting part, of course, because it's still the same assumptions that Hollywood makes nowadays. So people who see movies and TV don't read books. People who read books don't watch movies and TV. Therefore, nobody will care if the film screws up the book, and if they do care, screw them. So why do we sit and take it? Fantasy is for kids and morons and people who want easy answers. What happens in a fantasy doesn't need to make sense because it isn't real. Case in point, in the Earthsea books, the way magic works is quite specific, a matter of language and names. It has rules which give it a necessary limitation, and the nature of this magic is one of the fundamental metaphors on which the story is built, and there is no sense or coherence to the magic in the film. So that is important because these worlds are created by the authors. They put their limitations in magic systems, they put their geography in there, they put different people, different colors in there, of different colors in there, different cultures as well. They might not go deep into all these cultures. Maybe they only focus on white cultures and white races of beings. But is that a problem? It is not. It is what the author wants to do, and Ursula Le wanted to create a diverse world, and Tolkien wanted to create a prehistoric mythology for England, and he focuses on the northwest of Middle Earth. He focuses on the Atlantis-inspired Numenor. He focuses on the elves, a white race of beings, and it is not because he only focuses on white that he is a racist. Those two things are not the same. And I mean, if Tolkien had written further books about the Easterlings, about the Haradrim, about the Far Harad people, would people be pleased? I don't know. I don't think so because the main series is still mostly white people. You have only Sam basically who has browner skin, whether it's because he's Standoff or maybe he's a far has some Harfoot blood in him. We don't know, but he's described as being browner of skin, and you know people wouldn't be happy with that because the main story still focuses on these white characters and however much diverse characters you write um, in surrounding stories in surrounding regions, people would not have been pleased. Fans would have been pleased, but media wouldn't be because they want to see representation in these white races as well. They don't care about the books, they don't care about characters, they just care about placing a few people of color in the series in a white background, which is really it's disgusting because it's really um, bad for the actors. I mean, it's really it's not very respectful to have you're just cast for being of a different color than white. That's very racist, uh, and it is unrespectful to the actor because they might try their best, but if this spins in your background, in your head, you're thinking about that on the reasons why you are cast, the reasons why the fans are going against these characters. I mean, that must be really hurtful. So, and of course, in the Earthsea series, it wasn't. It was the same. Um, and this is a reaction or one of the assumptions of Hollywood. A colored actor or two makes the casting color blind so that everybody else in the cast can be white, which is basically what they're doing in Rings of Power, and it's very racist because if you put the Harfords in there, just make them all brown skinned. I mean, people would be like, okay, those are Harfoot hobbits because they are all brown. So now it's just a bunch of hobbits of different colors thrown together without any sense. So yeah, they don't think, these writers don't think. So in Earthsea the archipelagons are brown, copper red, black. The much less numerous Karks are white skinned with dark or fair hair. Tanar is a Kark, a brunette white person. Get is an archipelagon, a red brown man. Vetch, an archipelagon, is black. In the film, Ogion, which was pronounced in the film as Ogion, is black, and there are a couple of colored faces in the Kargite army of King Tevek. I think it was King Tygarth. I hope I have the king's name right. He is not a character I know, so another original character placed there for no reason. Tanar is played by an actress evidently of partly Asian ancestry. Very beautiful, but how did she get there? How did Ogion get there? What the hell islands are they from? Oh, come on, it isn't real, it's just a fantasy, it's just a movie, it doesn't matter. Basically what Whoopi Goldberg said. And Ursula Le Guin says it does matter, it matters a whole lot. That's, then she goes into her reasoning behind creating Earthsea in the late 1960s. I live in a racially bigoted country, the USA. From start, I saw my Earthsea as a deliberate refusal to go along with the prejudice that sees white as a norm and a fantasy tradition that accepts the prejudice. If you're white, ask a colored reader of fantasy whether it matters. Ask them how often they found themselves in fantasy books or movies when they were growing up and how they felt about it. I'm only sorry it took me to book 4 of Earthsea to be able to refuse the prejudice that sees male as a norm. That matters too. And in this respect, the filmmakers did pretty well, even allowing girls to go to Rogue School, basically the Academy of Magic. One of them is named Penelope. Cool name, huh? Only maybe the wrong archipelago. I want to say that I'm very sorry for the actors. They all tried very hard. I'm not sorry for myself or for my books. We're doing fine, thanks. But I am sorry for the people who tuned in to the show thinking they were going to see something by me or about Earthsea. I will try to be more careful in the future and not let either myself or my readers be fooled. So I think this part is very important as well. If you're white, ask a colored reader of fantasy whether it matters um, to see themselves represented. And certainly, if you're youthful, an adolescent, if you're growing up in a country where, or in a city or a town where you're the only black person or the only black family, seeing yourself represented or seeing yourself on screen is very difficult. Reading about yourself in books, having black characters, is very difficult because most of the people are white and will, write stories from their own perspective or create movies from their own perspective, mostly with white actors. Because, for example, in Belgium, if you have a book or a film made in Flanders, which is the northern region of Belgium, you mostly have white characters in there because the majority of people in Flanders is white, so most actors will be white. Of course, this is not a reason to create a story with only white characters. But if you go, for example, films made in Brussels or by people from Brussels, from the capital region, it's a very diverse region with over 160 nationalities living there. So those films are very diverse because they represent the situation in Brussels, which is a very diverse city, and people don't really have problems with that. Of course, then there are people with different colors there. So representation will depend also on the region where you live, on the city where you live. You might have cities that are more diverse than others. For example, if you live in China and you're the only black person, for example, in Beijing, uh, which wouldn't be the case, I think. I hope not. It's a city of several millions of people, so um, it would be weird to be the only black person, but of course it can be. But you won't see yourself represented because you will see Chinese ads, you will read Chinese books, Chinese films, which are of course also not racially diverse in terms of casting. So it very much depends on where you live, but I imagine that it must be difficult if you live in Europe or in the United States or any other part where your color is a minority. Seeing yourself represented will be difficult, and might have some impact on you know how you see yourself. And of course that's important, having this kind of mirror to look into, um, and to see yourself. Maybe there's a character that makes bad decisions, and you can use it as a mirror um, to look at yourself as an adolescent. Um, and of course, it's a fantasy series, so um, this is very very difficult to do in a series set in the real world. If you want, as an author, to create black characters, it's very difficult, because people will see it more as acculturation, or cultural appropriation rather. Taking this black character and talking as if black people in the real world. In fantasy, of course, this is a whole different thing because you can create black characters without any real world references, um, in a completely different cultural setting, completely different language, completely different background, uh, completely different grievances. There are worlds, fantasy worlds, where black is a majority. For example, in Evan Winter, his The Burning series, of which now two books have been published, The Rage of Dragons and Fires of Vengeance, which is a really great series. So if you have the chance to pick up these books, do. They're set in an African setting, with inspirations taken from African peoples. So those books are very good because the characters are very good, and that is of course, your important part. Your character development, your world building, how you set up your world, because you want to create a world and make people feel that it is real, and descriptions of characters make it more uh, imaginative. I mean, you can imagine these characters, but you can also, if the themes are right, and if the dialogue is good, and if the characteristics are, you know, applicable, then you can. Then it doesn't matter which color you are, but you can apply your own person to that character and look through the eyes of the character, as it were. Well, in the terms of would I make the same mistakes? Would I make the same decisions? Um, but yeah, it matters having, you know, people of color being represented as people of color in adaptations, and you know, keeping true to characters, which also goes for white people, because they want to see these stories as well. They want to see and the stories faithfully adapted with, you know, overall. So I think white fans would have no problem with an all brown cast for the Harfoots, for the Hobbits. They would have no problem seeing Druidine. Would have no problem seeing brown skinned Haradrim, uh, dark skinned people from Far Harad, Easterlings. I mean, even the Lossoth, which are basically an Inuit inspired people. People wouldn't mind seeing all those diverse or different cultures represented, but Amazon and the showrunners choose not to do this. They choose to put black characters in the show just to have black characters in the show, and it's disgraceful, and it's one of the main problems with this series. And of course, this is also a reaction of Ursula, um, a whitewashed Earthsea. Um, so what she says is, of course, it's full of scenes from the story arranged differently in an entirely different plot so that they make no sense. My protagonist is Gad, a boy with red-brown skin. In the film, he's a petulant white kid. Readers who've been wondering why I let them change the story may find some answers here. So it basically says the same part um, of the previous article. So most of the characters in my fantasy and far future science fiction books are not white; they're mixed. They're rainbow. In my big science fiction first big science fiction novel, The Left Hand of Darkness, the only person from Earth is a black man, and everybody else in the book is Inuit or Tibetan brown. In the two fantasy novels in the miniseries is based on everybody is brown or copper red or black except the Kargish people in the east and their descendants in the archipelago who are white. Um, so they are whitewashed basically. Um, Gad and Vetch are white in the series, which they are not because Gad is an archipelago and is red brown. His friend Vetch is black, which we have gone over. My color scheme was conscious and deliberate from the start. I didn't see why everybody in science fiction had to be a honky named Bob or Joe or Bill. I didn't see why everybody in heroic fantasy had to be white and why all the leading women had violet eyes. It didn't even make sense. Whites are a minority on Earth now. Why wouldn't they still be either a minority or just swallowed up in the larger color gene pool in the future? Of course, this is about science fiction, not really fantasy, because it doesn't matter if whites are a minority on Earth now. You can still write stories with a white character. Um, you know, I've said before, if it makes sense in your story to have a world with only white people, you create a world with only white people without necessarily being racist. You can have like a very small world with only a few islands or, you know, one big landmass where there's only white people. You can have a story with only black characters, which is the Burning series, um, which has, you know, only black characters as far as I recall from the books. You have the series, the what's it called? The Green Bone Saga by Fonda Lee, which is set in an Asian inspired world and there are no white people there. So you can have racially, um, you know, unicolor worlds, you can have racially diverse worlds, and it is what the author wants to do, it's what the author intends to do, it's a conscious decision. to create this world. For Tolkien, it was creating a prehistoric mythology for England, but that includes, you have to have, bits of the world surrounding it as well to make it more believable, to have different colors, to have different cultures all represented. Even though he doesn't, work them out quite as in depth as, for example, the elves or humans or dwarves. They're still there, they are present, and they can be shown on screen without any problem, without any issue from fans, but they choose not to do it. And that is a choice the showrunners made, and that's one of the choices that has been criticized. Um, of course, the fantasy tradition I was writing in came from Northern Europe, which is why it was about white people. I'm white but not European. My people could be any color I liked, and I like red and brown and black. I was a little wily about my color scheme. I figured some white kids, the books were published for young adults, might not identify straight off with a brown kid, so I kind of eased information about skin color in by degrees, hoping that the reader would get into Get Skin and only then discover it wasn't a white one. I was never questioned about it by any editor. No objection was ever raised. I think this is greatly to the credit of my first editors, you know, who bought the books before they had a reputation to carry them, basically. But I had endless troubles with cover art because people didn't want to see black people on cover art, apparently. Um, so and that's a thing for editors. I mean, if they don't want to see a black character on on a cover, they're racist basically, or they think that race matters for fantasy readers. It doesn't. If you have black characters, I mean, cool. If you have white characters, also cool. If you have Asian inspired characters, also cool. I mean, it's the characters that matter. Um, and if one of the characters is dark skin or black skin, I mean, sure, put him on the cover art. I mean, it's part of the books. So gradually, I got a little more clout, a little more say so about covers, and very, very gradually, publishers may be beginning to lose their blind fear of putting a non white face on the cover of a book. Hurts sales is the mantra. Yes, so on my books, Get with a white face is a lie, a betrayal of the book and of the potential reader, which is, of course, similar to adaptations, of course. If you see a black character represented and he's in the book a white character, you'll be like, what? And then you're going to ask, why did they change it? The same goes for a black character that has been portrayed as a white character. You don't know why they are changed because they're, written as white or black or having red brown skin or whatever skin color they have. For example, in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn and Stormlight Archive, there's very much diversity. So if you would change those characters to, for example, white people, um, all of them, people would be angry about that as well, because it's not true to the books. So I think it's possible some readers never even notice what color the people in the story are, don't notice, don't care. Whites, of course, have the privilege of not caring, of being colorblind. Nobody else does. I don't know if that's true, but I mean, if someone, you know, has has this has an opinion about that, I mean, uh, please do say so in the comments, because I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't care, but I'm white, so it might be really a privilege issue. I don't know. Um, I have heard, not often but very memorably, from readers of color who told me that the Earthsea books were the only books in the genre that they felt included in, and how much this meant to them, particularly as adolescents, when they had found nothing to read in fantasy and science fiction except the adventures of white people in white worlds. Those letters have been a tremendous reward and true joy to me. And of course, yeah, it's understandable, certainly as adolescents, that you will want to see yourself as well. As I've said before, maybe as a mirror to use, to look at the action of this character and maybe think, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing this wrong? Etc. Um, so So far, no reader of color has told me I ought to butt out or that I got the ethnicity wrong. When they do, I'll listen. As an anthropologist's daughter, I am intensely conscious of the risk of cultural or ethnic imperialism. A white writer speaking for non white people, co opting their voice, an act of extreme arrogance, in a totally invented fantasy world or a far future fiction setting. In the rainbow world we can imagine this risk is mitigated. That's the beauty of science fiction and fantasy, freedom of invention. But the invention lies with the author. And if you're making an adaptation of that, you take basically the world of the author and what the author wanted to do. I mean, you can perfectly create um, a world inspired by Tolkien with black dwarfs and black elves without calling it Tolkien. That's perfectly fine, and it's of course the freedom of invention, but also your imagination. And the showrunners don't have any. If you look at the dialogues alone, at the costumes alone, they're boring, they're bland, it makes no sense. And as I've said several times already, they just put in black characters to have black characters in the show, not for any other reason. Um, so, with all freedom comes responsibility, which is something these filmmakers seem not to understand, which is basically what these showrunners also don't seem to understand, as they also don't seem to understand script writing and having some logic and sense in the world you create. Because now we have only one black person playing an elf, one black person playing a dwarf, and it makes no sense in that world because you don't know where they come from. You don't see any other black dwarfs or black elves. So, yeah, where do they come from and where do they go after the Second Age? Because they're completely gone and they're not described by Tolkien at all. So, I mean, this doesn't make sense. And as I've said before as well, there could be a lot of diverse characters and diverse cultures in this world, but they chose not to. And that is a problem, and that is what fans are calling out. That is why fans are mad, because the diversity in the show doesn't make sense. The story is bad. Everything about the show is, it's going downhill. It started, it has some nice scenes still. It has some nice costumes still, but the majority of it is bland, it's generic, it's boring. Pacing is terrible, and the logic, there is no logic. There is no logic, not behind the diversity and not behind the story, not behind condensing the storyline so much that it becomes a convoluted mess. But they don't care. I mean, they got their $1 billion, they got their investment, they got 5 seasons. So now we get 5 seasons. Whether or not, I mean, the reviews go to 0% appreciation, it doesn't matter to them. Not one single bit. And calling people racist and sexist because they know they wrote a bad story. And people are calling out the truth that they don't care about the books, that they don't care about the lore, that they don't care about people of color. I mean, people are calling that out, and their response is to call people racist and sexist because they have no other reaction to go with. So, um, that is the main problem, I think, with the show. It's just bad showrunners and, the wrong people doing this. The same goes for The Wheel of Time, which is an incredibly diverse story if you read the books. Maybe not in the first two books, but gradually as they explore more of the world, as they see more of the world, these characters encounter a lot of people of color, of diverse cultures, and it's really great. Those are great characters, they are well written, and you know, they can put that into later seasons as well. But what they did was also create a diverse Two Rivers district, which doesn't make sense because in the Two Rivers, um, there have been no tax collectors for 6 generations, the Queen of Andor. Yes, there's a kingdom with only female rulers. Imagine that. Um, she doesn't visit the two rivers anymore since 7 generations or so. It's a very homogeneous population of white-skinned people with dark hair. And Rand, the main character, he's basically the only diverse character. He's taller than the rest. He has red hair, and he doesn't look the part. He doesn't look like Two Rivers and Two Rivers folk. And that's also a recurrent theme in the earlier books, that he doesn't look like those people. So people assume that he is an Aiel, from a different culture. Um, but he says, no, I'm from Two Rivers. I was born there. And everybody says, we've seen Aiel. We know what they look like. So you're an Aiel. You're not from Two Rivers. But of course he's born there. So he sees himself as Two Rivers. But what they did in the show is just put every color imaginable in Edmund's field. And now it's just diverse, and it doesn't make sense. Because, it's of course something weird to see, suddenly a lot of people of different colors if you're from such a homogeneous population. But I mean, none of the characters ever made a problem of that, as far as I recall from the books. So, um, but it doesn't make sense in the story, because Rand is the Dragon Reborn in the story from the beginning, basically, because he's different. But it doesn't really matter that you know this already, even before it's revealed in the books, because they're well written. Um, so people who are going against that and saying the fans are racist for saying that some colored persons don't fit in with the lore, or the characters don't fit in the lore. I mean, they're just coping with the fact that they know they are wrong. Their only reaction is not listening to the fans, and not looking more deeply into the books and saying, well, yeah, maybe I was wrong. No, they're instantly calling people sexist and racist because they have no other reaction to it. So anyway, a bit of a long video for this, but it's something that fantasy is something really important in my life. I have a lot of fantasy series I've read. Most of them, yeah, they are written by white authors, but of course that's also the history of the series, or of the genre, was mostly written by white people. So still, you would mostly find white authors, certainly in the USA and Canada and Northwest Europe and other places of the world. Uh, this is most likely changing. I have no doubt that if you go to China, you will find a majority of Chinese authors. That if you go to African countries, you will find books written mostly by African authors, which makes sense, of course. Um, but yeah, fantasy is really important because it gives something to, it's a different world to go into. It's imagination. It's imagining this different world, these characters. And Robert Jordan, who started writing The Wheel of Time, but unfortunately passed away before he could finish it, and it was finished by Brandon Sanderson. Um, he wrote an incredibly well written, diverse story, um, and yeah, the series that Amazon also makes of these books is just bad. Is diversity for diversity's sake, and not because it makes sense in the show or in the story. So anyway, those are my hour-long thoughts about this topic. So let me know in the comments below what you think about it. If you like this video, consider subscribing and leaving a like. If you don't want to, fine as well. Anyhow, I see you guys in the next one. Bye.